My deceptive mother-in-law framed me for theft, but I exposed her lies and took back control of my life. My name is Emily Carter, and I am 32 years old. For the past 5 years, I was married to Jason, a man I once believed was my life partner. Through those years, I endured more than I ever imagined, not because of Jason himself, but because of his overbearing and manipulative mother, Margaret. From the very beginning, she saw me as an outsider, someone unworthy of her son, and made it her mission to undermine me at every turn. However, I never anticipated the extent to which she would go to destroy my reputation and my marriage. It all came to a head one evening during one of our usual family dinners, which had long become an exercise in endurance for me. Margaret loved to play the role of a devoted matriarch, maintaining the illusion of a perfect, loving household. I had learned to keep my distance, but that night she had something planned. As I was clearing the table, she spoke in a voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Margaret accused me of stealing from the household funds. The accusation was so absurd that for a moment I could do nothing but stare at her in stunned silence. Jason, ever the dutiful son, turned to me with doubt in his eyes. He hesitated, giving her words weight. That hesitation was all I needed to see. I had been managing the household expenses for months, paying out of my own pocket because the shared account had mysteriously run dry. I knew Margaret had always resented my presence, but I never expected her to go so far as to accuse me of theft, to turn Jason against me. When I pointed out that I had been covering the expenses, she merely smiled, asking if I had proof. Of course, I hadn't kept every receipt. Who would when simply trying to support their household? Yet Jason, my own husband, wavered. Instead of standing by me, he sided with her. That night, as I packed my things, a strange sense of calm settled over me. I was done fighting for a place in a family that had never truly accepted me. Leaving Jason's house should have felt like a loss, but instead, it felt like freedom. I checked into a modest hotel on the outskirts of town and let the reality of my situation settle in. Margaret had underestimated me. She had always seen me as weak, as someone to manipulate and control. But what she failed to understand was that I was not a woman who allowed injustice to go unanswered. The next morning, I went through my bank records. Over the past year, I had used my personal funds to cover countless household expenses, utilities, groceries, repairs. Every necessary payment had come from my account. When I added it all up, the number startled me. I had spent nearly $120,000 on maintaining a home that wasn't even mine. Armed with this evidence, I decided to dig deeper. Margaret had always been secretive about finances, and Jason had naively allowed her complete access to his personal accounts. I recalled a time when he had asked me to pay a bill using his login details. My hands hesitated over the keyboard, but I reminded myself, Margaret had accused me of theft. If she had lied about me, I had no moral obligation to spare her secrets. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions. There were numerous transfers from Jason's account labeled as household expenses, but they weren't for bills or necessary purchases. They were deposits into Margaret's private savings account. She had siphoned off nearly $30,000 over the past year while making it appear as if I was the one mismanaging the money. With this information, I crafted an airtight case. I compiled all my financial records, highlighting every transaction. Then I sent Jason an email. I attached the bank statements, the timeline of payments, and the proof of Margaret's unauthorized withdrawals from his account. My message was simple. Jason, I've attached evidence of every expense I've covered for the past year. I've also included records of the transactions from your account. I'll let you decide who has been stealing from this family. Do not contact me again. Then I turned off my phone. Days passed. Jason called repeatedly, leaving messages filled with regret and uncertainty. Then the voicemail I had been expecting arrived. He had confronted his mother, and she had confessed, admitting to shifting the blame onto me, believing that Jason would never question her. But I wasn't finished yet. Margaret had spent years making my life miserable. She had tried to ruin my reputation and my marriage. It was time she faced consequences. I consulted a lawyer, presenting all the evidence I had gathered. We filed a formal complaint against Margaret for financial fraud and misappropriation of funds. Since the stolen money was under Jason's name, he had no choice but to be involved if legal action proceeded. I made it clear that I wouldn't back down, even if it meant exposing the entire family's secrets in court. But I didn't stop there. Margaret valued her reputation above all else, so I took steps to ensure her downfall reached those she most wanted to impress. I reached out to an old acquaintance, a journalist, and provided an anonymous tip about financial misconduct within a respected family. I kept the details vague, but I knew that once the story spread, Margaret's pristine reputation would be tarnished. When the article was published, the fallout was immediate. Margaret arrived at my hotel in a rage, her anger barely contained as she spat threats at me. I met her fury with quiet satisfaction. She had built her influence on deception, and now her empire was crumbling. In the end, Margaret was forced to repay the money she had stolen, and her standing within her social circles was irrevocably damaged. She had spent a lifetime manipulating those around her, but for the first time, she had lost control. As for Jason, he continued to reach out, seeking redemption. He claimed he wanted to fix things, to make up for not believing me when it mattered most. But I had already moved on. There was nothing left for me in that chapter of my life. I relocated to a city far from the remnants of my past and secured a new job in corporate finance. Ironically, managing the very thing Margaret once accused me of mishandling. My colleagues valued my expertise, and for the first time in years, I was thriving in an environment free of manipulation and deceit. One afternoon, as I was visiting an art exhibit, I heard a familiar voice. Jason. He looked worn, a shadow of the man I once loved. He attempted to rekindle something that had long since faded, but I stopped him before he could begin. I've moved on, I told him. You should too. Watching him walk away, I felt only relief. I had left behind a life of betrayal and control, and in its place, I had built something far more valuable: peace, independence, and the knowledge that I had won in the most meaningful way possible. As I sat on my apartment balcony that evening, overlooking the city lights, I realized something profound. Margaret and Jason had once made me feel powerless, but they had unwittingly taught me my greatest lesson. True strength isn't about seeking revenge. It's about reclaiming your power and building a life where you are no longer bound by the past. And that's exactly what I had done. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Stay tuned for the next gripping tale. You won't want to miss it.